I was standing in the hallway of a small private hospital room when the woman in the white coat looked at me and asked a question I still remember after all these years. "Mrs. Alina Hayes, before we begin, I need to know something. Did you willingly sign those documents, or were you pressured into signing them while you were recovering from surgery?" My hands were still shaking. Not because of the question. Because of what it meant. For 6 weeks, everyone around me had acted as if my voice no longer mattered. My son had spoken for me. My relatives had made decisions about me. Even strangers who had never met me had looked at me with pity because they believed the story they had been told. They believed I had lost my mind. They believed I was confused. They believed an elderly woman who had spent 40 years building a family had become a burden nobody wanted to carry. But that nurse standing in front of me was the first person who looked at me like I was still a person. Not a signature. Not an account number. Not an inconvenience. A person. "My name is Alina Hayes," I said quietly. "I was 68 years old that day, and before you ask what happened in that hospital room, you need to understand something." I looked down at my hands. The same hands that had packed my son's school lunches. The same hands that had worked double shifts when my husband lost his job. The same hands that had signed mortgage papers, medical forms, and every document a mother signs, because she believes she is protecting her family. "The truth is," I whispered, "I spent most of my life believing love meant sacrifice." The nurse stayed silent. And maybe that was why I trusted her. Because she didn't interrupt. She didn't tell me what I felt. She didn't explain my own story back to me. She simply waited. But this story does not start here. It starts 37 years earlier, in a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of Cedar Falls, Iowa, where I learned that people can misunderstand your kindness for weakness. And sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who understand your value last. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. My childhood was not dramatic. At least it didn't feel dramatic while I was living it. My father, Thomas Whitmore, worked as a mechanic for 28 years at the same auto repair shop. My mother, Margaret, was a school cafeteria worker who knew every child in her neighborhood because she believed feeding children was one of the most important jobs in the world. We were not wealthy, but we were stable. My parents never owned expensive cars, we never took luxury vacations. We measured success differently. A paid electricity bill was success. A full refrigerator was success. A child coming home from school knowing they were loved was success. I was the oldest of 3 children. My younger brother Daniel was 4 years younger than me, and my sister Rebecca was 7 years younger. Growing up, I was the responsible one. The child teachers trusted. The child neighbors called when they needed help. The child who would quietly finish homework while everyone else was outside playing. But being responsible has a strange side effect. People start believing you don't need anything. They think because you can handle things, you should handle everything. When I was 14 years old, I remember one evening when my mother came home exhausted from work. She had spent the entire day standing in the cafeteria because 2 employees had called in sick. She placed her purse on the kitchen table and sighed. "I don't know how we're going to pay for Daniel's braces," she said. I remember looking at her face. She wasn't asking me. She was just thinking out loud. But I went upstairs, opened the small wooden box where I kept my babysitting money, and counted everything. $47. That was everything I had saved over 5 months. I brought it downstairs and placed it on the table. My mother immediately pushed it back toward me. "No, Ellie, that's yours." I said something that stayed with me for decades. If everyone gives a little, nobody has to carry everything. At 14 years old, I thought that sentence was wisdom. I didn't know I would spend the next 50 years living by it. I graduated high school in 1975 with a 3.8 GPA. I received a scholarship to attend a local community college, where I studied accounting because numbers made sense to me. People could lie. People could change their minds. People could make promises and break them. But numbers told the truth. At 22, I married my husband, Richard Hayes. Richard was not perfect. I want to make that clear because life is rarely divided into heroes and villains. He was funny. He was hardworking. He could make a room full of strangers laugh within 5 minutes. But Richard also had one weakness. He hated feeling unsuccessful. He measured himself against other people constantly. If a neighbor bought a bigger house, Richard noticed. If a friend got promoted, Richard noticed. If someone appeared ahead of him in life, he carried that comparison quietly. At first, I thought I could balance him. That was my personality. I always believed problems could be solved if someone cared enough. Richard worked in construction management, and together we built a comfortable life. We bought our first home in 1983 for $74,000. I still remember the day we received the keys. Richard lifted me off the ground in the empty living room and said, "One day our children will say we built something." And we did. Our son Michael was born in 1985. From the moment I held him, I understood something completely different about love. Before Michael, I thought love was something you shared equally. After Michael, I realized parents often give without keeping score. I spent 18 years making sure that boy had opportunities I never had. I saved $250 every month for his college fund. I attended every baseball game. I helped him with science projects. I drove him to his first job interview when he was 16. When he graduated high school, he received a scholarship and eventually earned a business degree from the University of Iowa. Everyone congratulated Richard and me. They said, "You raised a great son." And I believed we had. Because Michael was not a bad child. That is important. People often want simple stories. They want someone to point at and say, "That person was evil from the beginning." But my son was not born cruel. He became someone who learned to value success more than relationships. And that difference matters. Michael was intelligent. Very intelligent. At age 29, he became a regional sales director for a technology company. By 40, he was earning over $180,000 per year. He owned a beautiful home. He drove a luxury vehicle. He wore expensive watches. From the outside, he looked like everything a parent would be proud of. And I was proud of him. Even when he started changing. The first time I noticed it was when he visited us after receiving his promotion. He walked through our house and looked around. Not with love. With evaluation. "You guys should really update this place," he said. I smiled. "This place has been good to us." He looked at the old kitchen cabinets. "Mom, good enough is why people stay average." That sentence bothered me. Not because it was insulting. Because it sounded like something Richard used to say. Michael had inherited his father's fear of being ordinary. But he had also inherited my determination. That combination can create someone incredibly successful. It can also create someone who forgets where they came from. After Richard retired, things changed quickly. His health declined. First it was his knees. Then his heart. Then his memory. For the final 3 years of his life, I became his full-time caregiver. I managed medication schedules. I drove him to appointments. I cooked meals based on his changing diet. I slept lightly because I was afraid I wouldn't hear him if he needed help. During those years, Michael visited less. At first, he had reasons. Work, travel, responsibilities. I accepted every explanation because I was his mother. Mothers have a strange habit. We collect excuses for the people we love. After Richard passed away, I was alone. He died peacefully in his sleep on March 14, 2018. We had been married for 42 years. 42 years. That is longer than many people today can imagine. After the funeral, Michael came to my house and sat across from me at the kitchen table. The same table where I had counted $47 as a child. "Mom," he said, "you can't keep living like this." I looked around. "Like what?" "Alone." I smiled slightly. "I've been alone for a while." He didn't respond. Instead, he started talking about practical things. My house. My finances. My medical needs. At the time, I thought he was being responsible. I thought my son was finally stepping up. I didn't realize he was slowly convincing himself that control was the same thing as care. And I didn't know that conversation at my kitchen table would become the beginning of the day when everything I owned, and everything I thought I understood about my family, would be questioned. Michael came to my house every Sunday for the next few months. At least that is what it looked like from the outside. A son visiting his widowed mother. A successful businessman making sure she was okay. Neighbors would see his car in my driveway and say things like, "You're lucky to have such a caring son." I would smile. Because what else could I do? But inside, I noticed small changes. The conversations were no longer about my life. They were about my decisions. How much are you spending on groceries? Why are you still paying for cable? Do you really need to keep this old furniture? Have you thought about moving somewhere smaller? At first, I answered patiently. Because I understood where he was coming from. After all, I was getting older. I was 68 years old. I had lost my husband. My son was worried. That was the explanation I gave myself. But eventually I noticed something. Michael never asked me what I wanted. He only asked me what he thought was best. There is a difference. A very important difference. One afternoon in October 2019, Michael arrived while I was organizing Richard's old photographs. He walked into the living room and saw pictures spread across the coffee table. He picked one up. It was a photo of Richard and me on our 25th anniversary. "We should probably go through all this stuff soon," he said. I looked up. "What stuff?" "Everything." I laughed softly. "Everything." "Yes, Mom, the house, the paperwork, the belongings, we need a plan." I put the photograph down. "Michael, I already have a plan." He looked surprised. "You do?" "Yes, I stay in my home as long as I am healthy enough. I keep managing my own finances. And when the time comes that I cannot do those things, then we discuss options." His expression changed slightly. Not anger. Disappointment. Like I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. "Mom, you're thinking emotionally." That sentence stayed with me. Because I realized something. Whenever I disagreed with him, my opinion became emotion. Whenever he disagreed with me, his opinion became logic. That was the beginning of the distance between us. Michael's wife, Laura, was different from him. She was 39 years old when this started. She worked as a marketing consultant and was actually kind to me. But she also avoided conflict. Laura believed peace was more important than honesty. Whenever Michael and I disagreed, she would gently say, "You both have good intentions." And maybe we did. But good intentions do not erase harmful actions. They only make them harder to confront. Their daughter, Sophie, was 12 years old at the time. She was the one person in the family who still treated me like Elena. Not Grandma Elena who needed help. Not Grandma Elena who needed supervision. Just Elena. She would sit beside me on the couch and ask about my childhood. She loved hearing stories about when I was young. One day she asked me, "Grandma, were you always brave?" I laughed. "No." She looked confused. "Really?" "No, I was scared many times. I just learned that being scared and moving forward can happen at the same time." I didn't know then that years later, Sophie would remember those words. The trouble began after my surgery. It was a routine procedure. At least, everyone told me it was routine. I had been dealing with a worsening hip problem for nearly 2 years. By January 2020, walking had become painful. I had stopped taking morning walks. I avoided stairs. I even stopped visiting friends because I hated asking someone to drive me. The surgery was scheduled for February 11. Michael insisted on taking control of everything. "I'll handle the paperwork," he said. "I can read it myself," I replied. He smiled. "Mom, you're about to have surgery. You don't need to worry about boring documents." Again that word. Need. He had slowly started making decisions based on what he believed I needed. Not what I requested. The surgery went well. The doctors said my recovery was progressing normally. But the medication made me tired. The pain medication made me slow. And that is when Michael moved faster. The day after surgery, I was lying in my hospital bed when he entered carrying a folder. "Mom, I need you to sign a few things." I looked at the folder. "What things?" "Administrative stuff." "What kind of administrative stuff?" He sighed. The same sigh parents use with children when they think the child is asking unnecessary questions. "Mom, please, I'm trying to make this easier for you." I remember looking at him. My son. The boy whose lunch I packed. The boy whose scraped knees I cleaned. The boy whose college applications I spent months helping with. And for a moment, I saw both versions of him. The child I loved. And the adult standing in front of me. "Can I read them first?" I asked. He paused. Just for a second. But I noticed. "Of course," he said. Then he placed the papers on the tray table. My vision was blurry from medication. My hands were weak. I started reading the first page. Michael immediately interrupted. "Mom, these are standard forms." I continued looking. The words were difficult. Legal language. Long sentences. Terms I wanted time to understand. "I'll look at these when I get home," I said. His face changed. Not dramatically. Quietly. A small expression of frustration. "Why are you making this complicated?" That question hurt more than I expected. Because I wasn't making anything complicated. I was asking to understand what I was signing. "I just want to read them." He sat down. "Mom, after everything I've done for you, you don't trust me." That was the moment. Not when he brought the papers. Not when he asked me to sign. That was the moment. Because he changed the conversation. The papers were no longer the issue. My love for him was. He made me feel guilty for wanting information. I looked at the documents again. I was tired. I was in pain. And I made a decision I regret even today. I signed. I signed because I was exhausted. I signed because I trusted my son. I signed because I believed family would never use my weakness against me. I didn't know exactly what those papers contained. I only knew something felt wrong. 3 days later, Nurse Clara Bennett entered my room. She was 56 years old. She had worked at that hospital for 19 years. She was the type of person who remembered details. Not because she tried. Because she cared. She noticed when patients were afraid. She noticed when family members spoke too loudly. She noticed when someone answered questions for a patient who was capable of answering themselves. And she noticed what happened when Michael brought those papers. At the time, I thought nobody had seen. I was wrong. On the morning I was discharged, Michael arrived early. He looked relieved. Almost finished. That should have worried me. "Everything is taken care of," he said. I smiled weakly. "Thank you." He put my bag in the car. During the drive home, he talked about my recovery. Physical therapy. Medication. Appointments. Everything except the one thing I wanted to ask. What did I sign? I finally said it. The car became silent. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he answered. Things that needed to be handled. I looked out the window. Michael. Yes. I'm asking you a simple question. He tightened his hands around the steering wheel. You signed paperwork allowing me to manage certain things. Certain things, eh? Yes. What things, eh? Another pause. Then, your finances for now. My heart started beating faster. What do you mean my finances? He glanced at me. Mom, you're recovering, don't stress yourself. That sentence. Again. Don't stress yourself. It sounded caring. But it was a door closing. Because every time I asked for clarity, he told me I was too tired. Every time I questioned him, he told me I was confused. And slowly, without anyone noticing, he was replacing my voice with his own. The following week, I discovered the first thing that made me realize this was not just about help. It was about control. I went to my bank to check something unusual. My automatic payments had changed. My account information had been updated. And when the bank manager looked at my file, she gave me a strange expression. Mrs. Hayes, she said carefully, are you aware that your son now has full authorization over this account? I stared at her. I'm sorry. She turned the screen toward me. There it was. My name. My account. My money. And underneath it. Michael Hayes. Authorized representative. I felt the room become quiet. Because suddenly I understood. The papers I had signed while lying in that hospital bed were not simple paperwork. They were the beginning of something much bigger. And my son believed he had taken away my ability to fight back. But he made one mistake. He forgot that someone else had been watching that day. Someone who remembered exactly what happened. Someone who had been waiting for the right moment to speak. The first thing I did when I left the bank was sit in my car for 17 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock. 10:42 in the morning when I parked. 10:59 when I finally started the engine again. People imagine moments of betrayal are always loud. They imagine someone throwing papers on a table. Someone shouting. Someone walking away dramatically. But most betrayal happens quietly. It happens in parking lots. In unanswered phone calls. In the few seconds, when you realize the person you trusted most has been telling themselves a completely different story. I wasn't angry at first. I was confused. Because my mind kept trying to protect Michael. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe the bank misunderstood. Maybe he was only trying to help. That was the hardest part. Not discovering what happened. Accepting that my own son could believe he was doing the right thing while hurting me. I drove home slowly. The same streets I had driven for 35 years. The same grocery store where I bought his favorite cereal when he was a child. The same playground where I watched him fall off his bicycle and cry because he thought he would never learn to ride. Memory is strange. It can comfort you and hurt you at the exact same time. When I arrived home, Michael was already there. His car was parked in the driveway. I remember thinking how strange it was. Before everything changed, seeing his car there made me happy. That day it made me nervous. He was sitting at my kitchen table. The same table where we had celebrated birthdays. The same table where Richard and I had paid bills. The same table where Michael had done his homework. He looked up. Where were you? I placed my purse down. The bank. His face changed immediately. Not fear. Recognition. Like he already knew what I had discovered. Why? I looked at him. Because I wanted to understand my own finances. He leaned back. Mom. Just that one word. A warning disguised as concern. What did you find? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked toward the refrigerator. a habit he had developed as a child. Whenever he was uncomfortable, he moved. He opened the door, closed it, then turned back. I was trying to protect you. I nodded slowly. I didn't ask why you did it. That surprised him. I continued. I asked what you did. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. Finally, he said, I became your power of attorney. There it was. The phrase I had heard but never imagined would apply to me. Power of attorney. 2 words that sounded harmless. 2 words that could mean many things depending on trust. I didn't know I was signing that, I said. You signed it. I know I signed something. His expression hardened. Mom, this is exactly why I needed to do this. What is? You don't understand these things. That sentence was more painful than the paperwork. Because it revealed something. Michael didn't think he had taken my independence. He thought he had taken responsibility from someone incapable of handling it. In his mind, he was the adult. I was the problem to solve. I worked in accounting for 32 years, I reminded him. And you're almost 70. I stared at him. There are moments when a person says something so revealing that you stop arguing. You simply listen. Because they have shown you exactly how they see you. You think getting older means becoming less intelligent, I said. He shook his head. No, I think getting older means accepting help. That's not what you did. His eyes narrowed slightly. What does that mean? It means you didn't help me make a decision. I pointed toward the papers sitting inside the folder. You made the decision and convinced me to approve it. He became quiet. Then he said something I will never forget. Maybe if you trusted me, this wouldn't feel like a problem. That sentence told me everything. Because he believed trust meant obedience. He believed a loving mother should never question her son. But I had spent my entire life teaching Michael to think. To ask questions. To understand things. And somehow, he had forgotten to apply those lessons to himself. I didn't fight with him that day. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten him. I simply said, I want copies of everything I signed. He looked uncomfortable. Why? Because they belong to me. That answer seemed to bother him. Not because it was wrong. Because it reminded him I still existed. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael became more controlling. Again, not in ways that outsiders would immediately recognize. That is what makes these situations difficult. He didn't lock me in my house. He didn't yell at me. He didn't behave like someone from a movie. He behaved like someone who believed he was entitled. He started reviewing my purchases. He questioned medical appointments. He suggested I should sell my house and move closer to him. Every suggestion sounded reasonable when spoken quickly. That was his strength. Michael was persuasive. He had built a career convincing people. At work, that ability made him successful. At home, it made him dangerous. My daughter-in-law Laura noticed something was wrong. One evening, she called me. Alina, are you okay? I hesitated. Yes. She knew I was lying. You don't sound okay. I looked at the phone. For a moment, I wanted to tell her everything. But then I imagined what would happen. She would talk to Michael. Michael would say I was emotional. She would say we all needed patience. And the issue would disappear beneath the word family. So I only said, I'm trying to understand some decisions Michael made. There was a pause. What kind of decisions? I closed my eyes. The kind where someone helps you without asking if you want help. Laura became quiet. And that silence told me something. She knew. Maybe not everything. But something. A few days later, I received a call from the hospital. Mrs. Hayes. Yes. This is Clara Bennett. I was one of your nurses during your recovery. I immediately remembered her. She had been kind. She had brought me extra water when my throat was dry. She had adjusted my pillow when I was uncomfortable. She had spoken to me like I was not invisible. How are you, Clara? I'm doing well, I hope you are recovering. I am. There was another pause. Then she said, there is something I need to tell you. My hand tightened around the phone. What is it? I've been thinking about it since the day you were discharged. What day? The day your son brought documents for you to sign. My heart stopped for a second. I sat down. What about that day? Clara took a breath. I need you to know that I noticed something. I said nothing. I noticed you asked him what you were signing. The room felt smaller. You heard that? Yes. What else did you hear? Her voice became careful. I heard you say you wanted time to read the papers. I closed my eyes. Because hearing someone else confirm my memory was powerful. For weeks, Michael had made me question myself. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I remembered incorrectly. But Clara remembered. He told you they were standard forms, she continued. I felt a chill. Yes. And then you asked again. I whispered. Yes. And then your son said something I wrote down. You wrote it down. Yes. My breathing changed. What did he say? Clara answered slowly. He said, Mom, you don't have to understand every detail, you just have to trust me. I covered my mouth. Because that sentence was the exact thing I remembered. The thing I could never prove. Until now. Why did you write it down? I asked. Clara was silent for a moment. Then she said, because I've worked with patients for 19 years, and I've learned that sometimes the smallest details are the ones people need later. I looked out the window. For the first time since the surgery, I felt something I hadn't felt. Not anger. Not revenge. Hope, because Michael thought those documents had ended the conversation. He thought the signature was the final word. But he forgot something important. A signature can show what someone wrote. It cannot always show what someone understood. And now there was a witness. A witness who remembered the exact moment my choice was taken away. But what I didn't know yet was that Michael's next decision would reveal exactly how far he was willing to go. Because he wasn't only trying to control my finances. He was preparing to sell the one thing I had spent my entire life building. My home. My home was not just a house. That was something Michael never understood. To him, it was an asset. A number. A property value. A line on a financial statement. But to me, that house held 40 years of ordinary moments that became priceless because they could never happen again. The first mark on the hallway wall where Michael measured his height every birthday. The small crack in the kitchen tile that appeared when Richard dropped a heavy box while we were remodeling. The backyard where we planted an apple tree in 1991 and watched it grow taller every year. A home is strange that way. The walls are not what make it valuable. It is the invisible history attached to them. Michael saw the value of the house. He never saw the memories inside it. 2 weeks after Clara called me, Michael arrived at my house with another folder. This time I noticed something different. He wasn't asking. He was presenting. There is a difference. People who ask leave room for your answer. People who present have already decided. I found a great option for you, he said. He placed the folder on the table. I didn't touch it. What is it? A retirement community. I looked at him. I told you I'm not moving. He sat down. Mom, you need to be realistic. I am. No, you're thinking emotionally again. That phrase had become his favorite weapon. Emotional. confused, tired, old. Words that slowly made a person doubt their own judgment. I opened the folder. There were pictures, beautiful apartments, a dining room, a fitness center, a garden. It looked pleasant, but I wasn't looking at the pictures. I was looking at the paperwork underneath. And there it was. A real estate authorization document. My heart sank. Michael. Yes. Why is this here? He looked away. What? This document? It's just part of the process. What process? He didn't answer immediately. And that pause told me everything. You already started something. His expression changed. Mom, don't make this dramatic. I asked you a question. We were exploring options. Without me. He sighed. Because every time we talk about this, you refuse to accept reality. I closed the folder. Whose reality? He looked confused. Mine. No. I shook my head. Your reality. That was the first time I saw genuine frustration on his face. Not because I was wrong. Because I was no longer playing the role he expected. For years, Michael had known me as the person who sacrificed. The person who adjusted. The person who made things easier. He didn't know what to do with a version of me that said no. I'm your son, he said. I know. I'm trying to help you. I know. Then why are you fighting me? I looked at him. Because help does not require removing someone's choices. That sentence ended the conversation. Not because he agreed. Because he had no answer. After he left, I sat in the living room for almost an hour. I looked around. And I realized something painful. I had spent decades protecting my family from hardship. Now I had to protect myself from the same people. That realization is a difficult one for any parent. Because we spend our entire lives preparing our children to survive without us. Nobody prepares us for the possibility that we may need to survive their choices. The next morning I called an attorney. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. She was 52 years old and specialized in elder financial protection. When I first met her, I apologized. I don't know why. Maybe because even after everything, part of me felt guilty. I'm sorry for bringing this situation to you, I said. Rebecca looked at me. Mrs. Hayes, why are you apologizing? I hesitated. I don't want to cause trouble for my son. She nodded. That tells me something. What? That you are still protecting him. I looked down. She continued. Before we discuss documents, I want to understand what happened. So I told her everything. The surgery. The papers. The bank account. The conversations. And finally Clara. When I mentioned the nurse, Rebecca immediately became more focused. Did she document what she heard? Yes. That could be important. Important enough to change anything. Rebecca leaned back. It depends. On what? On what the documents say, your medical condition at the time, and whether there was evidence that you understood what you were signing. I nodded. For the first time in weeks, someone was speaking to me like an adult. Not like a problem. Not like a fragile person. Like someone involved in a legal situation. Rebecca reviewed the documents Michael had arranged. After 20 minutes, she looked up. Mrs. Hayes. Yes. Did you understand that this gave your son broad financial authority? No. Did anyone explain it to you? No. Did you have independent legal advice? No. She placed the papers down. This is concerning. I swallowed. What happens now? She answered carefully. Now we gather facts. That was something I appreciated about Rebecca. She didn't promise revenge. She didn't promise that Michael would lose everything. She didn't create a fantasy where one conversation would fix years of problems. She simply said, "We gather facts." And that is what we did. Over the next month, I started rebuilding my understanding of my own life. I requested copies of my financial records. I reviewed every transaction. And slowly patterns appeared. Michael had not taken money directly. That would have been easier to prove. Instead, he had started making decisions. Large payments were moved. Investment accounts were reorganized. Insurance information was updated. Everything looked organized. Everything looked professional. That was what made it frightening. Because careless mistakes reveal themselves. Carefully planned control hides behind paperwork. Then I found something I didn't expect. A document dated 3 days after my surgery. It was a request related to my home. Michael had already contacted a realtor. Before asking me. Before discussing it. Before I even knew he was considering selling. I stared at the paper. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel angry. Not because of the house. Because of what the action represented. He had moved from helping me make decisions to making decisions and informing me afterward. That difference was everything. A week later, I received a message from Laura. "Can we talk?" I called her. She sounded nervous. "Elena, I need to ask you something." "Okay. Are you angry with Michael?" The question surprised me. "I'm hurt." She became quiet. "He told me you were having trouble understanding things." I closed my eyes. There it was. The story. The story he had created. The one where he was the responsible son. And I was the confused mother. "Laura," I said, "do you believe that?" She didn't answer. And that silence told me more than words could. "I don't know," she finally said. That was honest. And I respected honesty. "Laura, I need you to understand something." "What?" "I am not fighting my son because I don't love him." Her voice softened. "Then why?" "Because loving someone does not mean allowing them to erase you." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "I didn't know everything." "I know. Michael never showed me the documents." That surprised me. "He did." "No." And that was the first crack in the story. Because Michael had convinced everyone that this was a family decision. But even his wife had not seen the full picture. A few days later, something happened that none of us expected. Michael called a family meeting. He invited me. He invited Laura. He invited Sophie. And he invited my brother Daniel and sister Rebecca. He said it was time to clear up misunderstandings. Those were his exact words. Clear up misunderstandings. I knew then that Michael believed he could still control the situation. He believed if he explained enough, everyone would agree with him. But he didn't know one important thing. The person he thought was the weakest person in the room had finally started preparing. And the person he forgot about was the nurse who remembered everything. The family meeting was held on a Sunday afternoon. Michael chose that day because he knew Sundays had always been important in our family. For years, Sunday had meant dinner. It meant everyone sitting around the table. It meant stories. It meant normal life. I think that was intentional. He wanted the room to feel familiar. Safe. Like this was just another family conversation. But it was. When I arrived at Michael's house, I noticed something immediately. There were more people than I expected. My brother Daniel was sitting near the window. My sister Rebecca was beside him. Laura was on the couch. Sophie was quietly sitting at the end of the room, holding a glass of water. And Michael was standing near the fireplace. The same place where he had displayed awards from his career. Sales awards. Leadership awards. Certificates. Evidence of everything he had achieved. I remember looking at those awards and thinking something strange. Michael had spent his whole life collecting proof that he was successful. But he had never considered whether he was becoming someone he could be proud of. "Mom," he said when I entered. I nodded. "Michael." He smiled slightly. "Thank you for coming." I sat down. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Michael began. "I know there have been some misunderstandings recently." That word again. Misunderstandings. A word that made serious problems sound accidental. I want everyone to know that everything I have done has been because I love my mother. Daniel looked at me. Then at Michael. "What exactly happened?" Michael took a breath. "Mom has been struggling since Dad passed away." I immediately noticed something. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking about me. That is a very specific feeling. Being present while someone describes you as if you are not there. I have been trying to make sure she is safe. Rebecca crossed her arms. "Safe from what?" Michael looked at her. "From making decisions that could hurt her." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. The person who had taken control of my decisions was explaining that he did it because he feared I would make bad ones. Daniel spoke. "Did Alina ask you to take over her finances?" The room became quiet. Michael looked uncomfortable. "That's not the point." Daniel's expression changed. "It sounds like the point." Michael looked toward Laura, almost expecting support. But Laura stayed silent. That was the first moment I saw Michael realize he was losing control of the room. "I think everyone needs to understand something," Michael said. He turned toward me. "Mom has always been independent, but independence doesn't mean refusing help." I answered calmly. "I never refused help." He looked surprised. "You refused my help." "No." I shook my head. "I refused losing control over my own life." Nobody spoke. Then Michael said, "You're making this sound worse than it was." I looked at him. "Did you explain the documents before I signed them?" He paused. "Just for a second. But everyone noticed. I told you they were important." "That wasn't my question." He looked away. "Mom." Again. That word. The warning. The attempt to return me to the old role. But I continued. "Did you explain that you were asking for authority over my accounts?" Silence. Daniel looked at Michael. Rebecca looked at me. Laura lowered her eyes. And Sophie stopped moving completely. Because children notice more than adults think. Finally, Michael said, "You signed voluntarily." That was the sentence he had been waiting to use. The legal sentence. The protective sentence. The sentence he believed ended everything. But I had prepared. "I did sign," I said. He nodded. "Exactly. But signing something and understanding something are not always the same." His expression changed. Because he knew where this was going. "Who told you that?" I looked at him. "No one." Then I reached into my purse. I placed a folder on the table. Rebecca immediately recognized it. "This is from my attorney." Michael's face tightened. "Your attorney?" "Yes." The room changed. Not dramatically. Quietly. Because everyone understood something important. I had stopped asking permission. Michael opened the folder. He looked through the first few pages. Then he stopped. "What is this?" I answered, "Documents related to the day I signed." His eyes moved across the page. And then he saw the name. Clara Bennett. He looked confused. "What does a nurse have to do with this?" I said nothing. Rebecca answered. She witnessed the interaction. Michael looked up. She was a nurse. Yes. She doesn't know anything about my mother's finances. No, Rebecca said. She knows about your mother's ability to understand what was happening. Michael became quiet. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Then he laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because he was trying to convince himself. This is ridiculous. I watched him. The confidence was fading. She was on medication. Rebecca nodded. That is exactly why her observations matter. Michael looked at me. Mom, are you seriously doing this? There was pain in his voice. Real pain. And that was the hardest part. Because despite everything, he was still my son. I wasn't celebrating his discomfort. I wasn't enjoying seeing him scared. I simply wanted my voice back. I didn't want to do this, I said. He looked at me. Then why? Because I asked you to explain. Silence. And instead of explaining, you made me feel guilty for asking. His eyes dropped. For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to sit at that kitchen table doing homework. The boy who cried when he lost his first baseball glove. The boy who once told me, Mom, when I'm rich, I'll buy you anything you want. But people grow. And sometimes they grow around the wrong ideas. Michael closed the folder. This is an attack. No, I shook my head. It's accountability. He stood up. I can't believe you think I would hurt you. I looked at him. I think you convinced yourself you weren't hurting me. That was the first time he had no immediate response. Because maybe that was true. Maybe Michael had never thought of himself as someone taking advantage. Maybe he had built a story where he was the hero. The responsible son. The protector. And that is why this had gone so far. People rarely admit they are the villain in their own story. The meeting ended without shouting. Without anyone throwing accusations. Without dramatic exits. Michael went upstairs. Laura stayed behind. Daniel and Rebecca sat with me for almost an hour afterward. Sophie came over quietly before I left. Grandma. Yes. She hugged me. And she whispered, I knew you weren't confused. I held her. Those 5 words meant more than she knew. Because when someone spends enough time telling you that you cannot trust yourself, hearing someone say they believe you becomes powerful. The following weeks were quiet. That surprised me. I expected chaos. I expected anger. But real consequences are often quieter than people imagine. Michael stopped visiting every Sunday. At first, every week felt strange. Then every month felt strange. Then eventually, I started building a new routine. I returned to my morning walks. Slowly at first. 10 minutes. Then 15. Then 30. I started volunteering twice a week at the same community centre where my mother once worked. I helped children with basic accounting and homework. I laughed more. I slept better. And I realised something. The hardest part was not losing the version of Michael I had. The hardest part was accepting that version may have never existed the way I remembered. Meanwhile, Michael's life changed too. Not because of some dramatic punishment. Because reality caught up with him. At work, he became distracted. His performance declined. The same confidence that made him successful began to work against him. People noticed. A man who believed he was always right became someone who struggled when others questioned him. Laura eventually moved into a separate apartment for a few months. Not because she hated him. Because she needed space. She later told me. I spent years avoiding conflict because I thought conflict damaged families. She looked down. But I learned that avoiding truth damages families too. Daniel became closer to me again. He admitted something I never expected. I always thought you were the strong one, Ellie. I smiled. I'm not always strong. He nodded. I know that now. Rebecca visited more often. She brought groceries. She fixed things around the house. Small things. Real things. And slowly, our family began learning a different kind of relationship. One based less on pretending. One based more on honesty. 6 months after everything happened, I received a letter. It was from the hospital. They were recognizing employees for years of service. Inside the letter was a note from Clara. She wrote, "Mrs. Hayes, I hope you are doing well. I want you to know something. The day I spoke up was not because I wanted to harm your son. It was because every patient deserves to understand their own choices." I read that sentence several times, because she had understood something important. This was never about revenge. It was never about destroying Michael. It was about restoring something that should never have been taken. My choice. A year later, I attended a small ceremony at the community centre. They were honouring volunteers. When my name was called, I walked onto the stage. There were only about 80 people there. No cameras. No newspaper. No big announcement.